You're watching PM Agenda. Time to bring in our Monday afternoon panel of political strategists. With me here in Canberra, Grahame Morris, and in the Sky News Centre, Bruce Hawker. Bruce, I want to start with you. The death of Wayne Goss, former Queensland Premier, a long-time Labor hand, hailing from that state. How do you think Wayne Goss will be remembered?
I think with great fondness and recognition for the achievements that he made in a relatively short time, David. He first and foremost led Labor out of the political wilderness in Queensland after 32 years. I mean, they talked about Whitlam leading Labor out after 23 years in opposition. Well, it was 32 years for Labor in Queensland. That was a remarkable achievement, and it was Goss who really transformed both Labor and Queensland, in my view. Until then,
we should explain what the gerrymander meant too, in terms of making it harder for Labor to win.
Well, for example, in rural seats in Queensland had double the value in votes that an urban seat would. So, for example, Joe Bajocki-Peterson was able to govern with 21% of the popular vote. There was also an additional vote for the Liberals, but 23% was what he got, and that was what gave him the right to be Premier for so many years. This led to entrenched corruption at a political and a police level, and it was, of course, Goss, following on from the Fitzgerald inquiry, who swept all that away and introduced massive reform to the way in which governance of Queensland operated through the Crime and Misconduct Commission and other enhanced powers for bodies overseeing government. He also abolished the special branch, which was an entrenched, corrupt organisation in the Queensland Police Force. He was a remarkable politician.
Grahame, it's easy to say, isn't it, that someone would have ultimately cleaned up all those things, but he's the guy who did it.
Yeah, and look, he wasn't a bad bloke for a Labor leader. He did. Look, he was Captain Clean. And he also, people forget this, but he spawned two fairly long-term premiers, Beattie and Bligh, and a Prime Minister in Kevin Rudd. So, you know, all of that, I think, is part of his legacy. But yes, the cleaning up Queensland after a rugged period is the important one. And when I look back over the last 40, 50 years of elections, getting rid of Wayne Goss is the one where I always wondered if the electorate got it wrong. You know, did he deserve to get kicked out? Well, probably not. And were the coalition really ready at that stage to govern? Well, probably not.
It's an interesting point because the coalition lasted a very short time, didn't they, after that?
Very short.
Because it was the Mundingburra by-election. Goss had a one-seat majority. They lost that seat in a by-election, lost government, but Borbidge at the time, wasn't it? How long did he hang on?
And look, Rob Borbidge is a wonderful bloke, but I'm just not sure that the team was ready to govern. They hadn't really gone through the preparation, the policy stuff. Not quite ready.
In fact, the Borbidge government lasted for just 2.5 years, David, and it was Beattie that won that election in 1998. I worked on that campaign. It was a great one. I had a very minor role in the 1989 campaign with Wayne Goss, but a more significant one in the 98 one with Beattie. And it's true, the Borbidge government really never felt at home with the Queensland electorate, never really had the legitimacy of a government because it won office on the floor of the Parliament rather than in a general election.
We're going to hear from Peter Beattie in the next hour as well. I spoke to him this afternoon from New York, and Wayne Goss did want to move into federal parliament, but his first brain tumour saw him pull out of the contest after he was pre-selected to take on Pauline Hanson, actually, in the seat of Oxley. Peter Beattie reckons he would have gone on to a great success in the federal parliament. Just quickly, Bruce, I don't know, do you agree with that? You've seen a lot of people try and make that jump. Peter Beattie's one of them. Do you think Wayne Goss could have?
I think he could have and should have. The tragedy, of course, was that tumour was diagnosed. It was successfully removed, but then he really decided to take a different path with his life, and I think that was fair enough. I think Labor at the time was struggling with its national leadership. I think within a short period of time, Goss would have made the transition not just to federal politics but to federal leadership, and that could have changed the entire political landscape. But it's one of those great could-have-beens of Australian politics. He never made the transition. We'll never know, but we do know that he was a man of remarkable talent who like so many of these other really good Labor leaders, was bigger than the party he led. He wasn't a former union leader. He was a young lawyer. He understood the power of the law. He saw how important it was in fighting some of the worst aspects of the Bjelke-Petersen period of office. And I think for those sorts of things, he should be remembered and revered as a great Australian state leader. Let's move on to the international summits. It's summit season. APEC in Beijing at the moment, G20, or in between that and the G20, I should mention there's the East Asia Summit in Burma, then comes the G20 in Brisbane. Grahame, it is a very big week, an important week for Tony Abbott on the world stage.
It's huge. You know, we start with well, we got the US president, but really we got the Putin thing. And, you know, this is actually quite hard. The Prime Minister would be thinking, well, you know, I want to tell him that we want access to the site where the plane fell down, and we want safe access. We want the culprits dealt with, and while we're at it, Putin, your tanks are wrecking the roads in Ukraine, so get out of there. Now, maybe not the last one. And Putin, what would he be saying in return? Well, I sort of would like the sanctions lifted. Now, you know, Putin speaks a little bit of English, but this will be in Russian, so that sort of delays the whole thing. But it's important, I think, and I suspect the Prime Minister would be the same, is to get this over and done with, clear the air, so that we can get back onto the real economic state that's in Australia. We've got the UK Prime Minister, the Indian Prime Minister, the Chinese Prime Minister, all talking to our Parliament.
All of that's important. All of that's important. But a lot of Australians are pretty angry about MH17, aren't they?
Yeah. Well,
and he's got to have some show that he's given it to the guy.
Well, he's got to deal with that. But, you know, even the foreign affairs people, they have their head in a wet paper bag at the moment, because normally you would say that the talks afterwards, you come out and describe. How would you describe the talks? Normally it's cordial, frank,
robust,
warm. You know, I've never heard anyone come out and say, look, it was cold, frosty and testy.
But is it any surprise, Bruce, that the PM has now dialed it down a bit? I mean, the shirt fronting talk's long gone. Today, we saw it earlier, he said, Russia said that it'll do everything to bring the perpetrators to justice. Good on Russia. And I'll just be looking for an assurance that they mean what they said then.
We're not going to get Biffo in Beijing by the sounds of it, or even a Bingle in Brizzy. Look, I think that is sensible to be toning it down. Look, he made a point about shirt fronting, and I think he got some popular support for that, but that macho talk was always going to be difficult to back up when he actually came face to face with the other guy. And I think ultimately that level of aggression was probably counterproductive in terms of international rapprochement and getting cooperation from the Russians for all the things that you and Grahame were just discussing then, which is of critical importance, of course, you know, getting to that crash site and finding out what happened, bringing the perpetrators to justice and so forth.
He did apparently, I don't know if he did, but the teams were able to get in a couple of times in the last couple of weeks, so who knows, maybe the tough talk helped move things along a bit. Who knows?
Who knows?
It does, but look, we don't want to spend the next 10 days with all these leaders here with the Australian media saying, you know, how many marbles they jammed up each other's nose, while the rest of the world is talking about the economy and all that sort of stuff.
The most important thing for Australia, and certainly for the Prime Minister, is landing this free trade agreement in the next few days. Grahame, the politics of selling this, is it pretty straightforward? Is it a win-win-win, everyone's a winner, or are there going to be some groups that are miffed?
Look, there are always a few bruised people in this sort of thing. But I look at it, you know, how would we be if everyone else is negotiating a free trade agreement with China and we are left out? You know, I would find that very uncomfortable. And people used to say in the late 50s that McEwen, who had this commercial arrangement organised with Japan, was one of the best trade ministers we've ever had. Well, Andrew Robb has done Korea, he's done Japan, and he's about to pull off China.
Yep.
You know, I suspect in 20, 30 years' time we may well be saying that Andrew Robb was the greatest trade minister we had. Good on him.
Bruce, he has been one of the quiet achievers of the Abbott government, hasn't he?
I agree with that, actually. I think he's done a good job. Almost, I think, despite rather than because because of Tony Abbott, but he has been in there doing these things. So, of course, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating, and as Penny Wong and others have pointed out, it has to be a free trade agreement which is genuinely fair, and that will only be discoverable when the document is produced. For example, the Australian Industry Group recently surveyed its members, and amongst the manufacturing members of the AIG, only 11% thought that they would be better off as a result of a free trade agreement. So a lot of people in the manufacturing side of things are going to be worried. We have to make sure that the anti-dumping laws are still in place, that we don't lift our side, the tariffs on our side, and find that these government-owned businesses in China are receiving support behind the scenes. They're the sorts of things that I think our negotiators would be looking at and would hopefully be making sure aren't part of the equation at the end of the day, because if that is the case, then it won't be a good deal for Australia.
No,
we have to have a good deal.
But if there can be access for the services industry, things like banks, being able to set up branches and other products easily, financial services, I mean, China is moving towards these needs these services as their wealth grows. We're great at providing them. This could be a big opportunity.
I think it'll be a fantastic opportunity if banks and other insurers and other industries, the accounting industry, can get in there. I mean, virtually there's no Australian banking in China at all so far, and we really have to change all that. So yes, it's critically important for Australia to get a free trade agreement. I don't think anyone's in any doubt about that. It's just making sure that the various elements are negotiated in a way that protects, or does not protect, but doesn't disadvantage our own people here in Australia.
I expect this time that we talk next week, mark the time, is roughly when we'll get all the detail on that free trade agreement, because the Chinese president, Xi Jinping, is addressing the Australian Parliament on Monday next week. So presumably around that time we'll see the thing signed off and get some detail on it. So look forward to talking to both of you then all about it. Grahame, Bruce, catch up with you then. We'll take a break. Back with more on PM Agenda. Stay with us.